Think medieval people were all about chastity and purity? Think they spent their time praying and avoiding anything remotely sexual? Well, buckle up, because you're about to discover that medieval sexuality was so wild, so bizarre, and so absolutely unhinged that it makes modern dating apps look like Sunday school. You're about to dive into the shocking world of medieval sexual practices that make 50 Shades of Grey look like a children's bedtime story. From aphrodisiac feasts featuring animal testicles, to public impotence trials where men had to prove their sexual dysfunction in front of judges, these are the facts that will completely destroy everything you thought you knew about the Dark Ages. Spoiler alert, they weren't dark because people weren't having sex, they were dark because of what people were doing while having sex. Let's start with one of the most ridiculous courtship practices in human history: bundling. Picture this: you're a medieval young man, and your parents have found you a potential spouse. Great. Time for a romantic evening, right? Wrong. Time to get tied into a sack and thrown into bed with a complete stranger. Bundling was the medieval equivalent of a supervised sleepover, except way more awkward and with significantly higher stakes. Young couples would be wrapped together in bed, fully clothed, often with a wooden board placed between them, to prevent any inappropriate contact. Because nothing says romance like sleeping next to someone with a plank of wood separating your bodies. But here's where it gets truly insane. This wasn't just tolerated by parents, it was encouraged. Families would actually invite suitors to spend the night bundled up with their daughters, thinking this was somehow a safe way to let young people get to know each other. It's like medieval parents looked at the concept of chaperone dating and said, you know what this needs? More physical restraint and shared body heat. The practice was so common that special bundling bags were manufactured specifically for this purpose. We're talking about a medieval industry built around preventing people from touching each other, while forcing them to sleep in the same bed. The cognitive dissonance is absolutely staggering. And surprise, surprise, bundling didn't exactly work as intended. Historical records show that pregnancy rates among bundling couples were significantly higher than among couples who courted in more traditional ways. Turns out that putting a hormonal young couple in bed together, even with barriers, doesn't actually prevent nature from taking its course. Who could have possibly seen that coming? The best part? Religious leaders of the time were constantly complaining about bundling, calling it immoral and dangerous, while simultaneously being unable to stop it because it was so deeply ingrained in rural culture. It's like the medieval equivalent of parents trying to ban social media. Technically possible, but practically impossible. Medieval people took the phrase, "food is love," to absolutely terrifying extremes. We're not talking about chocolate and strawberries here. We're talking about elaborate feasts designed specifically to get people in the mood, featuring ingredients that would make a modern person call the health department. The star of medieval aphrodisiac cuisine? Animal testicles. Specifically, the testicles of young bulls, rams, and boars, which were considered the ultimate sexual enhancement food. Medieval cookbooks are full of recipes for stones. That's what they called testicles because, apparently, medieval people were too classy to say balls. Prepared in every way imaginable. Roasted, boiled, fried, ground into powder, mixed into wine. If there was a way to prepare testicles, medieval chefs found it. But testicles were just the beginning. Medieval aphrodisiac menus included sparrow brains, because apparently eating the brains of tiny birds was supposed to enhance sexual performance. They served dishes made from the reproductive organs of various animals, believing that eating fertility would create fertility. It's like sympathetic magic, but with significantly more organ meat. The spice trade wasn't just about flavor, it was about getting laid. Pepper, ginger, cinnamon, and saffron were all considered powerful aphrodisiacs, which explains why these spices were worth their weight in gold. Medieval people were paying fortune for what was essentially edible Viagra. Wealthy nobles would host elaborate love feasts, where every single dish was designed to increase sexual desire and performance. Here's the truly bizarre part. These aphrodisiac feasts were often served at wedding receptions. Imagine going to a wedding today and being served a 7-course meal of animal genitals and brain matter, all designed to help the newlyweds have better sex later. The wedding cake was often made with ingredients like pine nuts, almonds, and honey, not because they tasted good together, but because they were all considered sexually stimulating. Medieval physicians actually wrote detailed treatises on aphrodisiac cooking, complete with specific recipes and preparation instructions. We have surviving manuscripts that read like medieval sex cookbooks, with titles like On the Generation of Semen and Foods That Increase Lust. These weren't underground publications. They were legitimate medical texts studied by scholars and physicians. The obsession with aphrodisiac food got so extreme that certain ingredients were actually banned during religious fasting periods, not because they were unhealthy, but because they were considered too sexually stimulating for people who were supposed to be focusing on spiritual matters. If you think having your parents meet your significant other is awkward, try having a room full of nobles watch you lose your virginity. Welcome to the medieval bedding ceremony, where privacy was not just discouraged, it was illegal for aristocratic marriages. The logic behind witnessed consummation was actually pretty straightforward. In a completely insane medieval way, marriage wasn't considered legally valid until it was consummated. And since marriage contracts often involved massive transfers of land, money, and political power, there needed to be witnesses to prove the deed was done. Because nothing says legally binding contract like having your wedding guests watch you have sex. The process was elaborate and humiliating in equal measure. After the wedding ceremony, the bride and groom would be escorted to their bedchamber by a procession of wedding guests. The bride would be undressed by female relatives, while the groom was undressed by male relatives. Because apparently medieval people believed in gender-segregated strip shows. Then came the main event. The couple would be placed in bed together while witnesses, usually high-ranking nobles, church officials, and family members, would stand around the bed and watch. We're not talking about a quick peek to confirm things were happening. These witnesses would stay for the entire duration, sometimes offering encouragement and advice during the process. But wait, it gets worse. In some cases, witnesses would actually examine the bed sheets afterward, looking for blood as proof of the bride's virginity and evidence that penetration had occurred. Imagine having to present your bed sheets to a committee of judges like you're submitting evidence in a court case. Which, technically, you were. The most insane part? This wasn't just for royal marriages. Any marriage involving significant property or political alliances could require witnessed consummation. We're talking about thousands of medieval couples who had to perform their most intimate moment in front of an audience of relatives and strangers. Some couples tried to game the system by having witnesses wait outside the bedroom door, but even this wasn't always acceptable. Court records show cases where marriages were annulled because the consummation wasn't properly witnessed, meaning the couple had to do it all over again, this time with proper supervision. The practice was so normalized that medieval etiquette manuals actually included instructions for proper bedding ceremony behavior, both for the couple and for the witnesses. There were rules about where to stand, what to say, and how long to watch. Medieval people turned voyeurism into a formal social institution. Medieval aristocrats didn't just have sex, they scheduled it like a corporate board meeting, complete with astrological consultants and religious advisors. We're talking about a time when getting pregnant required more planning than a NASA space mission. The medieval obsession with timing conception was based on a combination of astrology, medicine, and religious doctrine that created the most complicated baby-making schedule in human history. Couples would consult astrological charts to determine the most favorable planetary alignments for conception, because apparently medieval people believed the stars gave a damn about their sex lives. According to medieval medical texts, the best time to conceive was during the waxing moon, when the woman was in a state of hot, humoral balance and when specific planets were in favorable positions. Some texts recommended waiting for particular saints' feast days, believing that children conceived on holy days would be blessed with special qualities. Imagine having to check 3 different calendars just to figure out when you're allowed to try for a baby. But the timing obsession went way beyond just picking the right day. Medieval physicians provided detailed instructions about the optimal time of day, usually midnight, the ideal weather conditions, warm and humid, and even the proper direction the bed should face, east toward the rising sun. Having sex became a logistical nightmare requiring more preparation than a medieval siege. The gender selection methods were absolutely bonkers. To conceive a boy, couples were instructed to have sex during the waxing moon while the man tied off his left testicle. Yes, you read that correctly. Because medieval people believed boys came from the right testicle and girls from the left. The level of anatomical ignorance required to believe this is truly staggering. Religious considerations made everything even more complicated. The church prohibited sex on Sundays, Wednesdays, Fridays, during Lent, during Advent, during menstruation, during pregnancy, while breastfeeding, and on approximately 183 other days throughout the year. Medieval couples had to navigate a minefield of religious restrictions just to find a day when sex wasn't considered sinful. Wealthy families would actually hire specialists, a combination of physician, astrologer, and priest, to create personalized conception schedules. These fertility consultants would analyze the couple's birth charts, medical histories, and religious obligations to determine the optimal times for baby making. It's like medieval people invented fertility apps, except with more superstition and significantly less scientific accuracy. The pressure to produce heirs according to these elaborate schedules was so intense that some couples would travel hundreds of miles to be in the right location during their optimal conception window, because apparently geography also affected baby-making success. Medieval people turned underwear into religious artifacts, and the results were exactly as weird as you'd expect. We're talking about a time when your choice of undergarments could determine whether you'd have children, and when getting dressed required consulting both a priest and a physician. The girdle of Venus wasn't just a poetic name, it was an actual belt worn around the waist or hips, often made of silk or linen, and inscribed with religious prayers, astrological symbols, or magical incantations. These belts were believed to enhance fertility, ensure safe childbirth, and improve sexual performance. But fertility belts were just the beginning of medieval sexual accessories. Women would wear special amulets containing everything from powdered unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, to ground-up gemstones, all designed to enhance their reproductive capabilities. Some amulets contained written prayers or biblical verses because apparently God needed written reminders about what you wanted him to help you with. The most bizarre fertility accessory was the conception stone, a small rock or crystal that women would insert into their undergarments during sex, believing it would help them conceive. Different stones were thought to produce different results: emeralds for boys, sapphires for girls, and diamonds for twins. Medieval people thought they could control genetics with jewelry. Men weren't left out of the magical underwear game. They had their own fertility accessories, including special rings worn on specific fingers, amulets containing animal parts, usually testicles because medieval people were obsessed with testicles, and even specially blessed loincloths that were supposed to enhance sexual performance. The church got involved in the underwear blessing business. Priests would bless fertility belts, conception amulets, and even bed sheets, charging fees for their services. It's like medieval people turned their sex lives into a religious subscription service. Some fertility accessories were so elaborate, they required instruction manuals. We have surviving texts that explain exactly how to wear certain belts, which prayers to recite while putting them on, and what to do if they stopped working. Medieval people created customer service for magical underwear. The most expensive fertility accessories were made from materials like silk imported from China, gold thread, and gemstones, making them luxury items that only the wealthy could afford. Poor people had to make do with homemade versions using local materials, creating a class system based on the quality of your magical underwear. The belief in fertility accessories was so strong that some women refused to have sex without wearing them, and some men would refuse to sleep with women who weren't properly accessorized. Medieval people turned getting dressed into a prerequisite for getting laid. Think modern divorce proceedings are humiliating? Try having to prove your sexual dysfunction in front of a panel of judges, medical experts, and random courtroom observers. Welcome to medieval impotence trials, where privacy went to die and dignity was legally inadmissible. Medieval impotence trials were the nuclear option of divorce proceedings. Since the church had made divorce nearly impossible, claiming your husband was impotent was one of the few ways a woman could legally escape a marriage. But proving impotence required more than just your word. It required a full-scale legal investigation into your sex life. The trial process was absolutely bonkers. First, the couple would be examined separately by medical experts, who would inspect their genitals for signs of physical abnormality. Then they'd be questioned under oath about their sexual history, frequency of attempts, and specific details about what did or didn't happen in bed. But the real nightmare was the trial by Congress. Yes, that's what they actually called it. If the medical examination was inconclusive, the court could order the couple to attempt sexual intercourse under supervision. The supervised sex sessions took place in special rooms, either in the courthouse or in rented chambers, with medical experts and court officials watching through peepholes or from behind screens. The couple was given a specific amount of time to perform, and if the man couldn't achieve or maintain an erection, the marriage could be annulled. Some men tried to cheat the system by using various enhancement methods. Medieval Viagra, made from herbs, animal parts, or magical potions. Court records show cases where men were caught trying to smuggle aphrodisiacs into the trial chamber, leading to even more humiliating examinations to ensure they weren't using artificial assistants. The most insane part? These trials could drag on for months or even years, with multiple supervised attempts required before a verdict was reached. Some couples had to perform for the court dozens of times, because apparently, medieval judges believed in giving people plenty of chances to prove their sexual competence. Women who brought impotence charges faced their own humiliations. They had to prove they were sexually willing and capable, which often involved intimate examinations and detailed questioning about their own sexual responses. The assumption was that if a man couldn't perform, it might be the woman's fault for not being attractive or enthusiastic enough. The social consequences of impotence trials were devastating. Win or lose, everyone involved became the subject of public gossip and ridicule. Some men preferred to accept annulment rather than undergo the trial, essentially admitting to impotence to avoid the humiliation of public testing. Here's a fact that will blow your mind. The medieval church wasn't just tolerating prostitution. They were running the biggest sex trafficking operation in Europe. We're talking about an institution that preached about sexual purity while secretly profiting from the world's oldest profession. In 12th century London, the borough of Southwark had 18 licensed brothels, employing over 1,000 prostitutes. And who owned these brothels? The Bishop of Winchester. The church's involvement in prostitution wasn't a secret side business. Church leaders argued that prostitution was a necessary evil that prevented worse sins like rape, adultery, and homosexuality. So they decided to regulate and profit from it, just like today's government. The business model was genius in its hypocrisy. The church couldn't officially condone prostitution, but there was nothing in canon law preventing them from collecting rent from brothel owners. Medieval brothels operated under strict church regulations. Prostitutes had to follow dress codes, work specific hours, and live in designated areas. They were forbidden from working on religious holidays, couldn't refuse customers without cause, and had to submit to regular medical examinations. The financial arrangements were elaborate and exploitative. Prostitutes paid rent to brothel keepers, who paid rent to property owners, who paid taxes to the church. It was a pyramid scheme with sex workers at the bottom and bishops at the top. The most insane part: the church used profits from prostitution to fund religious activities. Money earned from sex work was used to build churches, support monasteries, and pay for religious festivals. Medieval people were funding their salvation with sin money. The system was so entrenched that when reformers tried to shut down church-owned brothels, they faced massive resistance from both religious and secular authorities. Too many people were making too much money from the arrangement to let moral concerns get in the way of profit. The church's prostitution empire lasted for centuries, only ending when Protestant reformers and changing social attitudes finally made the hypocrisy too obvious to ignore. But for hundreds of years, the institution that claimed to represent God's will on earth was running a sex trafficking operation that would make modern organized crime jealous. Medieval birth control methods were so bizarre, so dangerous, and so completely ineffective that they make modern contraception look like a miracle of science. Let's start with the classics: animal testicles. Because apparently medieval people thought the solution to every sexual problem involved animal genitals. Women would wear pouches containing weasel testicles around their necks, believing this would prevent conception. The logic was that since weasels were considered sexually promiscuous but had small litters, their reproductive organs would transfer this controlled fertility to humans. But testicle jewelry was just the beginning. Medieval contraception included drinking potions made from everything imaginable: ground-up beaver testicles mixed with wine, powdered iron dissolved in water, and concoctions containing mercury. Yes, the poisonous metal. This days made staposes with several testicle methods from a degemony too. Some women poisoned themselves trying to avoid pregnancy, which technically worked because dead people can't get pregnant. The sneezing method was particularly ridiculous. Medieval physicians believed that if a woman sneezed immediately after sex, the force would expel the man's seed before conception could occur. So women would carry pepper or other irritants to induce sneezing right after intercourse. Physical barriers were equally insane. Women would insert everything from honey-soaked wool to crocodile dung into their vaginas before sex, believing these substances would block or kill sperm. Some used half a lemon as a cervical cap, which actually wasn't completely ineffective due to the citric acid, but was probably incredibly uncomfortable and definitely not recommended by any medical authority. The timing method was based on completely wrong information about female fertility. Medieval physicians believed women were most fertile during menstruation and least fertile mid-cycle, the opposite of reality. So couples trying to avoid pregnancy would have sex at exactly the wrong times, essentially guaranteeing conception while thinking they were preventing it. Magical contraception was a whole category of its own. Women would wear amulets containing written spells, carry special stones, or perform elaborate rituals involving everything from burning specific herbs to burying objects under full moons. Some contraceptive spells required the woman to walk backwards around a church 3 times while reciting prayers, because apparently God needed very specific instructions about birth control. The withdrawal method existed, but medieval physicians warned that it could cause serious health problems for men, including madness, blindness, and death. So even the one method that actually worked was discouraged by medical authorities who thought incomplete ejaculation would poison the male body. Medieval people were sexually insane. They created a society where young couples slept together with wooden boards between them, and the church ran prostitution empires while preaching about purity. The medieval approach to sex reveals something fundamental about human nature. When people are desperate enough, they'll believe anything and try everything. Whether it's wearing magical underwear, eating animal brains for sexual enhancement, or having court-supervised sex to prove legal points.